Hey guys, how you doing tonight? Today we're going to learn about the 13 colonies. This is chapter 5 in your book. And as we're going along and we're learning about the geography and the natural resources of the colonies, I want you to fill out the chart you were given to do so that you can kind of write down and figure out and take some notes on what you're learning. You need to turn that into Miss Pellegrino tomorrow so that she can see how you did, and then you guys will discuss what you learned. Okay, so in the 16 and 1700s, that's when the colonists started settling in North America. They lived primarily on the coast, which means they lived by the water. They settled into 3 different regions of colonies. You had the New England colonies, the Middle colonies, and the Southern colonies. In New England, you had New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. While in the Middle colonies, you had New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. The southern colonies were made up of Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Each of these colonies, or each of these regions of colonies, they were made up in different ways. The land was different, the climate was different, their natural resources were different. So we're going to learn a little bit about that now. So the New England colonies. Well, what was it like there? Well, it was really rocky and sandy there, so the soil was really hard to grow crops in. Also, the mountains there were really steep and the valleys were really deep. So it was really hard to find good farmland there. So overall, it was a very difficult place to grow crops. The climate in the New England colonies also made it difficult to grow crops because, generally speaking, its growing season, which is the time of year that it's warm enough to grow stuff, it was short. So you could only grow things from May to October. The summers were warm, but the winters, they were really cold. So the farmers, they really only had enough time to grow stuff for their families. They may have had just a little bit left over to sell, but not really enough to make a really good living at selling crops. But what New England lost out on in farming, they did make up for in natural resources. They had a lot of wood, there were a lot of dense, thick forests in New England, and because of that, they were able to cut down trees and build ships and buildings and sell them so that they had things that they were able to sell and make a living off of. They also, because they lived on the Atlantic Ocean, were able to fish a lot, and they also caught whales, and they used those for food and for creating products to sell. So New England wasn't the best place to grow crops, but it did have a lot of natural resources. Okay, you ready? Let's talk about the Middle colonies. The Middle colonies, well, the land there was much more suited for growing crops. It had very fertile soil. Fertile soil means that it's really rich in nutrients and makes it great for growing crops. And instead of really steep mountains that were rocky, there were rolling hills, so it was a lot easier to find farmland. The climate, which is the average weather of a region, the climate in the Middle colonies was also better suited for growing crops. There were lots of sunny days and plenty of rain. The growing season in the Middle colonies was a lot longer than it was in the New England colonies. So as a result, the farmers were able to grow crops longer, and so they were able to live better off of their crops. Okay, so what kind of natural resources did they have in the Middle colonies? Well, we already talked about the fertile soil, so they were great for farming, but they also had a lot of wildlife. They trapped and hunted animals like beaver and deer for things like fur, and they used the fur for trading. They also had long wide rivers like the Delaware and the Hudson, and it made it wide enough so that the farmers could travel by riverboat to sell their crops and bring supplies home. Also, if the farmers were using these waterways, so were the fur traders. Okay, let's finish up by talking about the southern colonies and the land there. They also had fertile soil, lots of nutrients there, so it made it easy to grow crops in the southern colonies. They also had an area of land known as the Tidewater. This is an area of the southern coast that was made up of, or still is made up of, rivers, bays, wetlands, streams. It's wonderful for traveling and trading. There's also another area where the colonists settled, and this was on the backside of the Tidewater, and this is called the back country. Get it? Kind of, backside of the Tidewater, back country. It was higher, and like I said, behind the Tidewater area, but it was steep and covered in forest. So it was a little bit harsher to live there, but that's where the colonists settled. Let's talk about the climate for the southern colonies. There was lots of warm weather for most of the year. This made the growing season there last for between 7 and 8 months each year. So that was fantastic. They also got plenty of rain. So, you add sun and you add lots of rain and you can grow lots of things. That made it so that the colonists in the southern colonies were selling cash crops. And if you remember, cash crops are the ones that people grow just to sell and earn money. They don't really use them for themselves. They're not just feeding their families with them. So there's stuff like tobacco and cotton are cash crops. So they were able to do that because of the really, really long growing season in the southern colonies. Okay, we're in the home stretch. We're going to talk about the natural resources of the southern colonies. Fertile soil, can't not mention that. That allowed them to grow their crops very, very successfully. And then we also are going to talk about the waterways. We talked about the tide water when we were mentioning the land structure of the southern colonies, but the tide water waterways also allowed the colonists to ship their crops to market so that they could sell them. Okay guys, now you've gotten an overview on the different regions of the 13 colonies. What I want you to do now, if you haven't already done it, is I want you to make sure you filled out your chart telling me a little bit about the growing seasons and the climate, the land, and the natural resources for each of these regions on your chart that you were given. You're welcome to play this back, look at it, listen to it again and again as many times as you need. Remember, you need to turn your chart into Ms. Pellegrino tomorrow so that she can help you make sure that you've understood what you've listened to, and then we'll get working on a project tomorrow in class. You guys have a great time. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.